Welcome to The Hop. This is David Charles Allen, realtor at Village Properties in Santa Barbara with my good friend and co-host Patty Teal. So we'll celebrate this week's weather. We've had some pretty cold nights these last few days. We're looking ahead to the mid 60s. We did get a little bit of rain this past week. There's a little guess that we may get a couple sprinkles upcoming, but can't be too sure. There's some good life-size waves coming in. If the conditions weren't right, we did have that storm surf, so there was a bunch of waves, but they just weren't surfable, to say the least. Looking ahead, it's going to be another little swell potentially coming in, depending how it shapes up as it gets closer.
Sounds nice.
Brings us into the mortgage rates. So they're the same as when we last came on, 2.875 for conforming 30-year fixed and 33% for non-conforming jumbo 30-year fixed. As always, that's changing. And we've talked about it in the past about how interest rates can go up or down the blink of an eye, and kind of just be prepared for what works best for you.
That's great, David. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Takes us into our stats of this last week, too. We have 13 coming listings that are coming soon. We have 44 new listings, 56 pendings. So that's way up in comparison to last week where we only had 32 pendings. So as we can see, there's still a lot of activity in the market right now with 50 homes closing this past week.
Wow. Sounds good.
Yeah, usually this is a slow time of year, but as you can see, there's still a lot of active buyers out there looking for a home before the holidays.
Mm-hmm.
Today we have a special great guest, and if you're a resident of the San Ynez Valley, I'm sure you're aware of who this is. It's Bob Oswax, who has been an integral part of his community and business owner of Bob's Well Bread. How are you doing today, Bob?
Doing very well. Thanks for having me.
Great. So how's it like? I know you just opened up a new store. How's business been going?
Well, we actually opened up the new store in Ballard.
Yes.
We opened on October 1st. Los Alamos has actually been there for 6.5 years. And they're both doing very well. You know, sometimes 1 + 1 equals 1.5, but in this case, 1 + 1 definitely equals 2. I think Los Alamos continues to attract weekend tourists and locals. And I think what Ballard is attracting is all the locals from the San Ynez Valley and Santa Barbara, I'd say. We have a long line that goes out the door in Los Alamos on the weekends. So I think this enabled people to experience our food and pastries and bread and beverages without having to wait quite so long.
That's amazing. So it's interesting, I'm sure your story, how you came out to the West Coast to become some kind of actor or work in the movie industry. How did it switch over to being this beautiful baker?
Well, I didn't have the intention of becoming an actor, but I did move back in 1980 when getting out of college. I moved from New York to Los Angeles so I could get into the entertainment business, which I did. And I did that for, I guess, about 30 plus years. I started off working for Norman Lear, and I got hired to manage the advertising and promotion for his TV series. So at the time, you know, we were working on Sanford and Son and All in the Family still. We were just launching Different Strokes, Facts of Life, Who's the Boss?
Wow.
You know, all these classic sitcoms. I stayed with Norman and his company until 1985 when he sold the company to Coca-Cola, which ultimately became Sony Pictures. But at the time, I was young and had, you know, other things on my mind, and thinking that my company's being sold, I should go somewhere else. And I did. I went to Paramount Pictures, and then I went to Orion Pictures, spending a decent amount of time at both of those places. And then I went to the company that became Fremantle, which you all would know it from shows like American Idol and America's Got Talent and things like that. And I actually spent, you know, about 8 or 9 years with them, but spent 5 of those years in the UK setting up a global marketing and distribution business for their growing companies. And then in 2000, I got recruited back to the States by Sony in very much a much larger position that I left when when Norman Lear sold the company originally. So I went back and I was president of worldwide marketing for Sony Pictures Television in 2010.
Oh, wow.
I love that quote in one of your press releases that Lear gave to you to change things up every decade or so. I thought that was
He
really
did. You know,
interesting.
Norman was the first call I'd received when I got the boot from Sony in 2010. And he said, well, how long you've been there? And I said, like 11 or 12 years, something like that. And he said, how long you've been doing this business? And I said, well, I've been doing marketing since I worked for you, so 32 years. And he goes, his comment was over and next. Life isn't about doing the same thing the entire time, so be open to change. And at the time, you know, having spent 30 plus years as a hard driving executive focused on one thing, it wasn't in my brain to think about, well, I'll do something else, you know.
Right.
I
Yeah.
thought I was going to go back to another studio or network or cable network or streaming, and I did that. I did a lot of consulting, and I consulted with PBS and a bunch of other companies. But it was during this transition time that I started playing around. We had a wood-fired oven in our backyard, a big wood-fired pizza oven that we'd put in. And I started playing around with bread, and that wasn't immediately successful. And then I got some books and had some limited success. But it was when a friend gave me a copy of Tartine Bread by Chad Robertson from the famous Tartine Bakery in San Francisco that changed everything. First, the concept of how he described bread resonated. The instructions of how to make your starter and begin your bread and how to do everything just resonated strongly with me. And my first bread was amazing.
Wow.
Wow. That's hard
So
to do.
I said, all right, well, that's interesting. You know, in the meanwhile, I'm writing letters to headhunters and trying to apply for jobs. And, you know, the headhunters would call me back and they'd say, wow, you've got this great career and this great resume, but, you know, you're 50, you know, you're not going to get that job again. And it's like, really? You know, it's like, so that was the beginning of experiencing, you know, the ageism in the job market. But I was a little passionate and obsessed with making bread. So I said, well, all right, let's figure this out. Let's say I'll make it every day so that if it's early or late or humid or dry or, you know, hot or cold, how do you get consistent results so you're always having a bread that turns out perfect? Bread and baking is completely all about science and math.
My goodness. I had no idea there was so much to it.
Yeah, no, you've got to really understand fermentation.
Sure.
Fermentation happens at certain temperatures. It happens under certain conditions. And you have to understand the algebra and calculus of building up formulas and shrinking down formulas. So I started making it every day and, you know, trying to see what was going wrong if, you know, the conditions changed. If it was too cold, I was underproofing because fermentation happens at 75 degrees. And if it was too cold in the house in the winter, the bread wasn't rising enough. If it was too hot in the summer, it was overproofing and then it wouldn't turn out right either. So managing my process was important. Ultimately, I decided to study. So I went to San Francisco, and over the course of 2 years, going up there once every month or so for a week-long bread making course at the San Francisco Baking Institute, I studied everything that they offered in terms of bread, sourdoughs and baguettes and ancient grains and gluten-free and viennoiserie, which is pastry, and learned a tremendous amount. And at the same time, I hired a consultant to help me write a business plan.
Oh, wow.
Because now I'm thinking, all right, I'm not going to go back into the business. I've done it. I've done it all. I've achieved really, what I set out to achieve, but the business is changing, and maybe I am too old. I don't know. So I started working on a business plan, thinking that I would get my wife, to agree that we'd move up to the San Ynez Valley from LA, and we'd open a bakery there because we had a
Wow.
house there, so we knew it.
That's great. Well, it's great to hear your story. It feels like you kind of hit this brick wall and this position where you could keep going for one thing that really wasn't serving you, and you kind of found something new that really developed a passion for, and you're able to build this successful platform through that and kind of create the love through your bread and give it to others. And I think it's really great to see that.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
even though you have a fantastic product, I'm sure that the marketing that you did all those early years has helped you, don't you think?
Oh, totally. I think that's what separates me from many other bakeries is, I spent years and years marketing everybody else. The
Mhm.
shows I marketed, the talent I worked with. So now what I was really marketing was myself, and taking all that I know about the marketplace and how to reach people and how to present my product and how to brand it. I was able to sort of put that focus and direction onto, making Bob's Well Bread the next project I'd market.
Which I love the name. That's just so cute. And I know you do a lot of work with charity, and just the well bread has so many meanings to it.
Yeah, we try and give back. We donate all of our unsold bread at the end of the day.
It's beautiful.
And so that all goes to people helping people and veggie rescue. So it gets donated to communities and people who, especially right now, with the food banks, we want to make sure that it goes to seniors and schools and places that really need it. After we use everything, once we do everything that we think we can possibly do. So, if we're not going to make croutons out of it, if we're not going to use it in the kitchen for the sandwiches for the next day, things like that. But, we do donate thousands. I mean, they actually calculate our donation by the pound at the end of the year. So it's thousands of pounds that get donated every year.
That's
Wow.
so wonderful. That would be very sad if it just went to waste when people
Oh,
are going
totally, yeah.
hungry. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. So I've always hear it takes about 10,000 hours to master something. Do you
Oh,
say,
you're talking about Malcolm Gladwell then, right?
or are you constantly improving? Is it constantly getting better in your opinion? How do you feel about that?
I agree with it completely. And yes, it does take 10,000 hours. Maybe not 10,000, but it takes a lot. And we see that as we bring people into the bakery, new bakers, how they are shaping the baguettes or the breads, and if they're on the oven, how they're scoring, because each and every one of our breads has a unique score. You score your bread to release the gases.
Oh, wow.
Gives it that, like when you're looking at a baguette that's got the curved scoring lines coming down, or one of our levain or different breads, you're scoring it so that it opens up, the gases are allowed to escape, and the bread's allowed to rise when it's in the oven. But we give each bread a unique score. So, you'll see it when a new baker comes in. Do they understand how we do it exactly? And so it takes them weeks and weeks to get the hang of it as well. And we see the same thing even with baristas who come in, and, and how they make a latte, and how long does it take them until they can give it the really pretty, the rosette that goes on it, or the nice pretty art that goes on top of a latte. So it is a true concept.
That's true. So you have this new storefront you have is in the historic building in Los Alamos. Is that correct, or is that the one?
Ballard is the
Los
new one.
Alamos is the original historic storefront, and Ballard is the brand new historic. They're both historic
Oh,
buildings.
they're both historic. That's what I thought. Okay. And what's your intent on getting these historic buildings? Do you think it goes with the vibe you're kind of trying to fulfill?
Well, it started with Los Alamos, as I said, in talking to my wife and getting her to agree to move and do this bakery, which she didn't completely embrace at first because I hadn't spent my life in hospitality, in restaurants, in bakeries. And she's like, well, what do you know about? She had a little more colorful language than that. But we bought a house in Los Alamos 20 something years ago. When I was working at Sony, I got a very nice bonus for the year for the work I was doing marketing Seinfeld. And we took that money and we bought a little house in the wine country. So we'd been going to Los Alamos steadily for many years. And when the idea to open the bakery was percolating in my brain, I didn't want to do it in Los Angeles. The point of entry, just everything was wrong about it in my point of view. But the idea of opening a bakery in the wine country, surrounded by, crafts people that make wine, that make beer, that make cheese, farmers, that just was more appealing to join an artisan community than to just open up a bakery in the middle of LA.
Yeah.
Well,
So that building, that gas station that we converted into the bakery had been sitting there for years and years and years, completely vacant. Started off its life in the turn of the 20th century. It was called the Shady Oaks Cafe and Cabins, and it was a very small filling station, a cafe, and then there was 20 cabins behind the building. And if you think of James Cain and like Barbara Stanwyck and, To Have and Have Not, or The Postman Always Rings Twice, these film noir where, you're driving in the rain and you stop at this little filling station, you get a bite to eat, you sleep there, and the next day you go on again. That's what the Central Coast was littered with places like that. There was tons of them.
well, Los Alamos didn't used to be, as I recall. I've been gone from Santa Barbara about 5 years, but I don't remember it being such a big destination for people. I was kind of becoming one, but it must be just growing all the time as a food and wine destination. Is that what's happening?
Yes, I think there was a tipping point that happened probably 6+ years ago. Charlie's has been, an institution in Los Alamos for decades. Full of Life Flatbread came in like 15 or 17 years ago. When we first bought our house in Los Alamos, there really was nowhere to eat. It was just a little sleepy little town that we bought a house in. But then, some more winemakers went in there. Sonia Majewski from Casa Dumetz went in. Jamie and John started Bell Street Farm. There was Cafe Quackenbush. But when we came along, we brought something different. And then a couple more people came along. So I think if we weren't the tipping point, we were there at the inflection point when that happened. And the Skyview renovated the motel, and then the Alamo Motel renovated. So there became this movement. And yet at the same time, everybody that was doing something in Los Alamos, and I give credit to Charlie and Clark and Jamie and Sonia and everybody that's there, they're doing something that's unique and authentic.
Yeah.
So, you're not going to find a better flatbread than Clark's.
Wow, that's very cool.
The French food that they're doing at Bell's is amazing. And, we're making pastries and breads, and there's nobody else in town that's doing it like that. But we're all doing it at the highest possible level of what that product is. And I think that's what's driving this renaissance and all the press about the foodie scene there, because everyone's at the top of their game.
Right.
Yeah, that makes everything great. So how does it go into developing your menus? Do you kind of see something you like and give it a try, or kind of just go off the cuff?
Well, as I said, I did spend a couple of years working on a business plan and studying the bread. And so I had plenty of time to think about how this was going to be. Part of the the concept of the business plan was, I'll never be able to make enough money if I'm just a bakery. If I'm just counting on people to come in and buy a loaf of bread or a croissant, how many times a week are they going to do that?
Yeah.
But now we've got espresso and coffee and all kinds of drinks. But then you layer in a menu that's built around the bread. So, you're able to increase your guest check average. You're able to increase the potential number of times someone will come on a given week, because they may come once or twice a week for a loaf of bread, and they might come another couple times a week to grab lunch or a sandwich or something.
Yeah, and you got your weekly specials and breads of the day too that bring people in as well.
Yeah, we do that as well. But the menu really developed out of the concept of wanting the bread to be the star of the meal. So we really focused on, how do we create a menu that's around the bread, not have a meat dish and say, we'll put it on sourdough. But we create different meals for each of the different breads. So our breakfast sandwich is on an English muffin that we make. But we use farm fresh eggs, great local cheese. We make our own sausage, and that becomes its own very popular meal.
Wow.
And the same thing goes for all the other breads that we use on the menu. We make our grilled cheese on our New York deli rye, which is great. I was looking at, and I was, poring over, New York Times Magazine food sections and Bon Appetit and Food and Wine. And I was always looking for menu items that where the bread really was something that made a difference in the meal. So one of the meals that we make is called the Line Cook's Pate. And it's a really nice, smooth chicken liver pate. It's pretty boozy. It's got some brandy in there, and it's really nice. And it comes with something called a onion bacon marmalade, which is a reduced, like a marmalade made with onion and bacon. And then you put a little bit of that on the grilled sourdough with some of the pate, and it becomes a hugely popular meal.
Wow.
Good thing I ate before this interview, because even now it sounds so good.
We make it, our BLT, we use something that we make called pain au lardon, which translates into bacon bread. So we bake these chunks of bacon and fold bacon fat into the bread. So the bread is infused with fragrance and flavor. But when you grill the bacon bread and then you put on some aioli, some lettuce, and some tomato and put an egg on it, it's an open-faced BLT that is really satisfying because the bacon is already in there.
I think you went into the right career change.
Yeah, it sounds like you did a great job of doing all this. Now, I have a personal question. I haven't eaten bread in about 4 or 5 years because I developed a gluten intolerance. Have you seen a shift in going that route, or do you get asked that more and more often?
Well, I get asked it more and more often, and I've dealt with that, more than half of my life, because my wife and I have a daughter who at, just over 1 year old was diagnosed with celiac disease.
Yeah.
So you're gluten intolerant, but not celiac. Celiac disease is different than intolerance because it's a gluten. It's much more than an intolerance, and she can't eat gluten. So we knew a lot about gluten-free over the last 20-something years. But here's the deal with bread that's made in modern times, and why people, perhaps like yourself, have these gluten intolerances. The 20th century introduced lots of things like Wonder Bread. And when bread is made quickly, cheaply, and with additives, preservatives, and inferior ingredients, there's going to be a lack of ability to digest it. So if you look at a loaf of bread that you might buy at the grocery store, if it's got more than 3 ingredients, flour, water, and salt, avoid it, because it's all those other things and cheap flours and preservatives that make it hard to digest. I tell people who, like yourself, who have what they call a gluten intolerance, the difference between our bread and some of the breads they may have been eating, there's three key ingredient differences. One, we're using organic flour, so it's grown under safe, clean, and pure conditions. No additives, no preservatives, no pesticides. Then we're using high hydration. So there's a ratio of water to flour, and that tells you what your hydration level is. Your flour is always going to be 100% because that's what you need. But we use 80% hydration, meaning if I'm using 1,000 grams of flour, I'm using 800 grams of water.
Wow.
The key difference there is the high hydration allows the grains to fully soak, absorb the gluten, and then through the process of going for a long fermentation, we ferment the bread for 18 hours after it's mixed. The longer fermentation also helps soak the grains, but creates a more digestibility. So what happens, imagine, if you will, trying to eat a cup of oatmeal with only a few spoonfuls of water. It's too dry. You can't chew it, and you certainly won't digest it. The same thing is with bread. So people who have tried our bread who were gluten sensitive understand that they can have more success with sourdough that's been high hydration and long fermentation.
Well, yeah, because I've always heard, because of those protocols you mentioned, that what you encompass in your business is a lot what they do in France. So they're
Yep.
always saying, if you go to France, you won't have a gluten intolerance because they have better bread over there.
Exactly.
Like all they have to do is go up to Ballard now to get better bread, it seems.
Yeah. And it seems as though all the bad ingredients that you get at grocery stores are really kicking in a lot of autoimmune disorders for people. So kudos to you for making such healthy bread. Mm-hmm. So has the pandemic hurt your business? I suppose it has somewhat, but it sounds like you're still doing pretty good.
Well, when the pandemic hit in mid-March, I'd say January and February we were off to a record year. Our sales were, as high as they'd ever been. We'd just come off of Valentine's Day week, which was, I think it was Valentine's Day and President's Day. Like Valentine's Day was on a Thursday and President's Day was on the Monday. And that's our week. It goes from Thursday to Monday because we're closed on Tuesday, Wednesday. So that was like one of the biggest weeks we'd ever had because we had 2 holidays in there. So, January and February were just amazing. And, we'd heard, well, there's this pandemic and it's coming and it's China and everything, we'd heard it all, but it hadn't, softened our business yet. First and second week in March were a little soft. That third week in March, the 17th started it when they shut everything down. It was like we'd fallen off a cliff. But we didn't close. We never closed because we didn't have to close. We were deemed, as food businesses became essential businesses, we just pivoted. So right away, everything we did was takeout only. So we added phone lines right away so we could take more phone orders. And then I started offering free delivery in the Valley.
Oh, wow.
And then we came up with some meal concepts. So we would do quarts of soup that we paired with a baguette and a bag of salad greens. Or we did a meatloaf meal where you got enough meatloaf for 8 to 10 sandwiches in a block. You got a loaf of the bread we make our meatloaf sandwich on, some of the grilled caramelized onions that go on the sandwich, some of the aioli. You got all the ingredients for our meatloaf sandwich to make your own. And then we started doing something we were calling them BLD meals. So breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So we give you a choice of a pound of granola or 4 croissants or 4 English muffins, and that would be breakfast. Lunch might be a quart of tuna salad and a loaf of bread. And then dinner would be, one week it was a roast chicken with some salad and vegetables and a baguette. Another week we made a shepherd's pie. We did, we made a variety of things. And, we were able to satisfy people, getting a delivery of 3 meals in one fell swoop. And for people that weren't leaving their homes, or even for people that were going to pick it up, it was just a really good way of us continuing to do business and people continuing to figure out how they're going to feed their families.
Good for
So we
you.
did that for a while. And then we started doing deliveries with some of the local restaurants in Los Alamos. We formed with Clark at Flatbread something called Los Alamos Delivers. And we were delivering to Goleta, Santa Barbara, Montecito, and LA every week.
Wow.
So I'd say between March and June, whereas we fell off the cliff, every week we'd come back another 5% higher. So we went from below 50% back I'd say by the time Mother's Day came around, we were back to like 80, 90% of normal business. And once they allowed us to open up and serve outside, because the Los Alamos location is on a half an acre and we have seating for over 100 outside, it didn't matter. Our business became really strong again. Just, we had to practice the right protocols of social distancing the tables. Our servers were masked and gloved. We put in sanitizing stations throughout. As long as we managed the process and made sure that we were keeping our team safe as well as our customers, then we felt we could continue to do business.
Good
That's
for
amazing.
you.
It sounds like you did a lot in expanding your sphere of influence, so to say, just from your physical location. Is that something that's going to continue to progress, or as businesses start to open back up and people show up, are you going to kind of stick to just your physical location still?
Well, that's what did happen. Once we started to open up again, it just became unsustainable for us to continue to do free deliveries, because that was me doing it. That was the only way that was going to make any sense. Because if I paid somebody to be out on the road, it wouldn't have made sense. But and then it didn't. We just couldn't sustain doing all those deliveries to other places and still be able to serve the people that were coming up to the bakery. So
that makes sense.
It was a great way to adapt and pivot during those times. And if they shut us down again, we'll figure it out again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was a great way to connect with your community still, and still show that you're out there.
Well, boy, David, I don't know about you, but I learned more about bread than I ever knew. This has been fascinating, and I just love the idea of your well-bred bakery. So do you have a website? Do people order online? Or I imagine because Los Alamos...
we do have a website. The website is bobswellbread.com.
Okay.
Now that we're open in Ballard, we've got, a button when you get to the homepage to choose which location you're interested in. The menus are the same, but, we want the hours are different and things like that. So we just want people to know which bakery they're coming to. And we do have a shop tab on there where people can order bread and we ship it out. But we did disable that because during the recent election with the Trump administration interfering with the activities of the USPS, I just had too many problems. People weren't, we put a disclaimer on there that, baked goods are perishable and it may not arrive in the amount of time it should arrive. And if you're concerned about that, we can cancel the order, but we won't refund or reship. But then you'd get people that, because there was interference in the post office, they didn't get their package in time.
Right.
And it wasn't as fresh as they wanted, and they wanted their money back. And it's like, I can't keep doing that. So I'm just waiting until there's a little more stability in the services out there right now, and then I'll turn it back on again.
Well, that's great, Rob. Thanks so much for coming on the show today. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah,
thanks
thank
for
you,
having
Bob.
me.
It was fascinating.
Patty. Well, it's great having you this week and being with you, and look forward to next week.
Sounds great, David. Until next time. Bye bye now.
Go. See ya.